The ink on her father's will was barely dry when her uncle pressed a housemaid's uniform into her hands and told her she had 3 days to vacate her rooms. Marian Foxwell had stood in the doorway of what had been her bedroom for 22 years and looked at the folded gray dress without touching it. The room smelled of beeswax and lavender, the way it always had, the way her mother had insisted it always should. The curtains were cream with a pale blue stripe. She had chosen them herself at 14 from a draper's catalog her mother had held open across their laps on a Sunday afternoon. Her uncle, Mr. Clifton Foxwell, stood behind her with his hands clasped at his back. He had the particular patience of a man who has already won. "The Dunmore estate requires staff," he said. "Lord Aldrich Dunmore has just returned from the continent. His household is being reorganized. A housemaid's position has been arranged." Marian turned slowly. "You arranged a position. For me, as a housemaid. It is a respectable household. I am the daughter of Edmund Foxwell." "You are," her uncle said, "the daughter of a man who died without updating his legal documents, which leaves the estate, the title, and all assets to the nearest male heir, which is me." He said it without cruelty, which was somehow worse than if he had said it with some. "The dress will fit. Mrs. Arden had your measurements from the summer." She did not ask how he had known to have the dress made in advance. That told her everything about how long he had been planning this. What she did not tell him, what she kept entirely behind her teeth, was that she knew Dunmore Hall. She had been there twice as a child, once for a garden party when she was 7, and once for a winter supper when she was 11. She remembered high ceilings and a portrait gallery that seemed to go on past the point of sense, and a boy of perhaps 15 standing at the far end of it with his arms crossed, watching the guests below from the mezzanine with an expression she had not understood at the time, but recognized now as simply not wanting to be there. Lord Aldrich Dunmore's son. He would not remember her. She had been a child in a white dress with a yellow sash, unremarkable, the kind of guest that fills a room and leaves no particular impression. But she remembered the house, and more importantly, she remembered where her father had kept his correspondence. There were letters. There had always been letters. Her father's careful, methodical habit of writing everything down, of keeping copies, of folding documents into a leather case that he called, without irony, his insurance against the world, forgetting what was true. He had told her about those letters when she was 19, sitting in the library after everyone else had gone to bed. With a glass of port, he pretended not to notice she was drinking. "The Dunmore family owes your grandfather a significant acknowledgement," he had said. "Nothing so crude as money, a matter of land, a matter of record. Someday it may matter." She had not thought it would matter like this. She took the uniform from her uncle's hands. The carriage that carried her to Dunmore Hall 3 days later was not the kind of carriage Marian Foxwell had ridden in before. It was uncushioned, smelled of damp straw, and stopped twice on the road for reasons the driver did not explain. She sat with her single trunk and her composed expression and watched the Derbyshire landscape go gray, and then darker gray as the afternoon turned. The housekeeper met her at the servants' entrance. Mrs. Holt was a short, precise woman with iron-colored hair and the kind of face that had decided long ago what it thought of most things. She looked at Marian the way a jeweler looks at a stone of questionable provenance, not unkindly, but not with any particular warmth either. "Miss Foxwell," she said. "Yes. You have no prior experience in service." "No." Mrs. Holt was quiet for a moment. "Your reference letter was written by a solicitor." "Yes." Another pause, longer this time. "Well," she said, and turned without further comment, which Marian understood to mean that the conversation about her qualifications was finished and the expectation of competence had begun. Her room was small and cold, and at the top of a back staircase that creaked on the 4th step and the 9th. She learned that within the first hour, moving carefully, testing each one. She learned where the library was, the East Wing, accessible from the main hall, within the first evening. She learned that Lord Dunmore did not dine with the household staff and rarely came downstairs before 10 in the morning. She learned something else on the third day. She had been sent to air the upstairs corridor, an odd assignment, she thought, for a new housemaid, but Mrs. Holt had looked at her steadily when she gave the instruction, and Marian had not questioned it. She was pulling back the heavy velvet drapes in the east corridor when she heard a door open behind her. She turned. Lord Aldrich Dunmore was standing in the doorway of what she recognized as the secondary study. He was taller than she had expected. She had built the memory of that boy at the mezzanine railing into something in her mind, but the reality was broader-shouldered and darker-eyed and significantly more awake than anyone had any right to be at 9:30 in a house that ran this quietly. He was looking at her with an expression she could not immediately read. "You're the new housemaid," he said. "Yes, my lord." He didn't move from the doorway. His gaze was not unkind, but it had the quality of someone who noticed things. "You have chalk on your left hand." Marian looked at her hand. She had been making notes that morning in her room, working through what she remembered of her father's legal descriptions, sketching the layout of the estate grounds from memory. She had not checked her hands carefully enough. "I apologize, my lord. I'm not asking you to apologize for it." He was quiet for a moment. "What were you writing?" It was not a usual question for a lord to ask a housemaid. It was not a usual situation. "Letters," she said. It was not precisely a lie. He looked at her for another moment, then looked at her hands again. Not at the chalk, she realized, but at her hands themselves, the shape of them, the way she was standing. "What is your name?" "Foxwell, my lord, Marian Foxwell." Something moved behind his eyes, brief and unreadable. "Foxwell," he repeated. "Yes, my lord." He went back into the study and closed the door. She stood in the corridor with her heart doing something she refused to acknowledge as afraid. Dunmore Hall had 43 rooms, a library with 17 running feet of shelves on the north wall alone, a kitchen garden that had been allowed to go slightly feral, and a portrait gallery that was exactly as long as she had remembered it. She counted the portraits on the 6th day. She was not supposed to be in the gallery. It was not part of her assigned area, but the door had been unlocked, and she was a person who had always found unlocked doors extremely difficult to walk past. Her grandfather was not among the portraits. She hadn't expected him to be. But there was a small landscape on the east wall, between a woman in Tudor-era dress and a hunting scene that featured too many dogs, that showed a stretch of moorland she recognized. She had walked that moorland with her father when she was 12. It was part of what had once been the Foxwell estate's northern boundary, and, according to her father's letters, part of what had once been disputed between their family and the Dunmore estate 3 generations back. The painting was very old. It had been hung with a care that suggested someone knew exactly what it was and where it had come from. She was still looking at it when Lord Dunmore spoke from directly behind her. "Miss Foxwell." She did not startle, or she told herself afterward that she had not. "My lord, I apologize. The door was open. I know." He came to stand beside her, not close enough to crowd, but close enough that she could tell he was looking at the same painting. "Do you know this landscape?" She considered very carefully what to say. "I believe I may have walked there once." "As a child?" Where share? "North Derby, near the moorland past Harwick Cross." He was quiet for a moment. "That's quite specific. I have a particular memory for landscapes." He turned to look at her then, a direct, unhurried look that she met squarely because she had learned years ago that looking away from things made them worse. "You are not a housemaid," he said. It was not a question. "I am currently employed as one," she said. "That is not what I said." The corridor was very quiet. Somewhere below them she could hear the ordinary sounds of a house, a door, footsteps, the distant rattle of something in the kitchen. None of it seemed particularly relevant to what was happening in the portrait gallery. "Miss Foxwell," he said, "I have recently had occasion to go through my father's correspondence. He was, like many men of his generation, thorough to the point of exhausting. He kept letters going back 40 years. He paused. Your father wrote to mine. Many people wrote to your father, I imagine. Your father wrote to mine about a matter of land record, about a survey commissioned in 1843 that had never been properly filed, about a boundary marker that had been moved, he believed, deliberately, sometime in the 1850s. He was watching her carefully. He wrote 3 letters. The last one was sent 8 months before he died. Marian said nothing. I should like, Lord Dunmore said, with a deliberateness that had nothing unkind in it and nothing easy either, to know how you came to be in my house as a housemaid, Miss Foxwell, and I would prefer you told me the truth. She looked at the painting for one more moment, the familiar stretch of moorland rendered in faded ochre and gray, the particular slant of the light that was unmistakably northern. Then she looked at him. My uncle, she said, inherited my father's estate under a legal instrument that my father did not intend and did not anticipate. I have reason to believe there is documentation in my father's files that would alter that situation. My uncle knows this also, which is why I found myself with a housemaid's uniform and a position arranged before my father had been in the ground a month. She kept her voice level. It was an effort. The files are not at Foxwell Hall. My uncle has searched. Whatever my father kept, the letters, the survey, the original boundary documents, he kept somewhere else. I believe some of what matters may have been sent to your father for safekeeping. Lord Dunmore was quiet for a long time. And you thought you would find it here, he said. I thought I would look, as a housemaid. It was the position available. Something changed in his expression, not quite the shift she'd braced for, not anger, not the cold courtesy of dismissal. It was something that looked, she thought, almost like recognition, as if she had said something he had been waiting to hear without knowing he was waiting for it. My father, he said, kept a secondary archive. It is not in the library. It is in a room I had not opened in 6 years, because the last time I was in it, he was dying in the room above it and I did not see the point of papers. He stopped. Then, I opened it last week, when I came across your father's letters. Marian looked at him. I had my solicitor make inquiries, he said, about the Foxwell estate, about the current situation of its heir. A pause. I was informed there was that the estate had passed to a Mr. Clifton Foxwell of Bath. My uncle informed people of that efficiently. Yes, he did. He looked at the painting again. There is a leather case, he said slowly, in the archive room. It is addressed to my father, but the handwriting on the outer covering is not my father's and not, I believe, from anyone in his household. I have not opened it. She felt something go very still inside her. It was sent, he continued, 8 months before Edmund Foxwell died, approximately the time of the last letter my father received from him. For a moment she could not speak. The portrait gallery held its breath around them, all those painted eyes looking politely away. Why haven't you opened it? She finally said. He considered the question as if it deserved consideration. Because it did not seem to belong to me, he said. Because my father kept it separately from everything else, which suggested he understood it was being kept rather than received. And because, he stopped again briefly. Because the name on the outer cover is not my father's. Whose name is it? He looked at her directly. Yours. The archive room was on the ground floor of the east wing, behind a door that looked like part of the paneling if you didn't know to look for the join. Lord Dunmore opened it with a key from his own ring, without calling for a servant, without explaining himself to anyone. Marian followed him in. The room was not large. It smelled of cedar and old paper, and something faintly metallic that might have been the stove in the corner, which had not been lit in some time. The shelves held boxes, cases, rolled documents, the accumulated careful habits of a family that had been significant for long enough to have a great deal to preserve. On the lowest shelf, apart from everything else, was a leather case approximately the size of a lady's traveling diary. It was wrapped in oilcloth that had been tied with a cord rather than sealed. On the outer cover, in her father's handwriting, she would have known it anywhere, that particular tilt of the F's and the way he always double-crossed his T's, was written a single name, Marian. She crossed the room. She did not look back to see if Lord Dunmore was watching, though she was aware of him with a precision that had nothing to do with the situation and that she firmly set aside. She untied the cord. Inside the oilcloth was the leather case. Inside the case were documents, folded letters, a notarized survey with a seal she recognized from her father's desk, a handwritten account of some length that she recognized as her father's legal hand, careful and unhurried and absolutely legible. And beneath all of it, a single sheet of paper that was not a legal document at all but a letter unsealed. With her name at the top, she had to sit down on the floor to read it. There was nowhere else to sit, and she could not have stood. Her father had written it 8 months before he died. He had written it knowing, she understood as she read, that something was coming, that her uncle was circling, that the estate's legal situation was more fragile than he had let anyone see, that he was not well in ways he had kept from her. He had written it the way he had always spoken to her, directly, without softening, with the particular respect of a parent who has decided their child deserves the truth. I have sent these to the Dunmore archive because I trust old Dunmore to keep them without opening them, and because I do not trust my own house much longer. If you are reading this, then the worst has happened, and you have somehow found your way to Dunmore Hall, which means you are more resourceful than I give you credit for. Or the situation is worse than I imagined, or both. I suspect both. The survey is the important piece. The letter from the Land Registry of 1847 is the second. Together they establish what was taken, when it was taken, and who benefited. Your uncle has always known about the northern boundary. He helped your grandfather's solicitor misfile the original claim. The Dunmore family is owed nothing from us, but the current Lord Dunmore may be in a position to assist if he is the man his father was. His father was a man I would have trusted with my life. I'm trusting him with yours instead. Do not be quiet about what you know. You have never been good at it anyway. I always thought that was one of your better qualities. She sat on the floor of the archive room for quite some time. At some point, Lord Dunmore came and crouched down nearby. Not close, not intrusively, just near enough that he was present, and waited without speaking, which was, she thought, an unusual quality in a man who had every social license to fill the silence. When she finally looked up, he was watching her with an expression she recognized this time. She had seen it in the corridor that first day, and in the portrait gallery, and she understood now what it was. He had known who she was since the moment she had said her name. Foxwell, he had repeated, and then he had gone back into the study and left her standing in the corridor, not because he was dismissing her, but because he needed to think. You knew, she said. It was not an accusation. I suspected. The letters made me suspect. And then you said your name and I was. He paused. Nearly certain. And you said nothing. I waited to see what you would do. He looked at the papers in her lap. My father wrote to me about your father. Not about the legal matter, about the man. He said Edmund Foxwell was the most honest person he had encountered in 20 years of business dealings, and that honesty like that was worth knowing and worth protecting. He stopped. Then, more quietly, I should have been faster. I should have made inquiries before I returned to England. I was 6 years on the continent, and I came back to find everything already in motion. "You couldn't have known. I could have known sooner." He said it without deflection. "I should have." The difference, she had noticed, between men who acknowledged fault and men who didn't was not volume. It was specificity. He had said, "I should have known sooner." Not "I'm sorry you suffered" or "what a terrible situation." He named what he had failed to do and did not dress it up. Her father, she thought, had been right about his father. The solicitor came from Dorby 3 days later. Lord Dunmore wrote to him himself, using the language she discovered when she read the draft he left on the study table, of a man who had spent considerable time understanding what her father's documents said and what they established. He did not ask her to explain it to him. He went and read it himself in the archive room, with her father's letters and the survey and the land registry correspondence, and came out 3 hours later with an extremely long list of questions for his own solicitor. Her uncle received a letter from Lord Dunmore's solicitor in Bath 11 days after she had arrived at Dunmore Hall. She was not present for whatever Clifton Foxwell said when he read it, but Lord Dunmore's solicitor reported with some satisfaction that the response had taken 4 days to arrive and contained a great deal of language that suggested its author understood he was not in a comfortable position. The legal process was not fast. It was never fast, but it was begun. And beginning, her father had always said, was the part that required the most courage, because it was the part where you were most exposed and least protected. She remained at Dunmore Hall during that time, not as a housemaid. Mrs. Holt, who turned out to have suspected something from the first day, and was clearly gratified to be confirmed in her suspicion, had quietly redistributed her duties within the first week. Marian was given the use of the library and the secondary study, and an understanding with the kitchen that her breakfast would be kept warm without comment on what hour she appeared. She was careful, in those weeks, to be useful rather than merely present. She catalogued a portion of the archive that no one had touched in years. She identified 3 documents that had been misfiled under the wrong family name. She spent 2 evenings helping Lord Dunmore's solicitor understand the geography of the northern boundary dispute in terms that could be explained to a judge who had never been to Derbyshire. Lord Dunmore, Aldrich, she had begun to think of him, though she did not yet say it, was present in the house in the way that the house itself was present, consistently, solidly, without requiring acknowledgement. He did not make her feel observed. He made her feel accompanied, which was, she found, a completely different thing. He had a habit of leaving books in the places she frequented, not recommended to her, not presented with any comment. Simply left, on the corner of the library table, on the windowsill of the east corridor. She began to suspect this was not accidental around the 4th book, when she found a volume on Derbyshire land law placed precisely where she habitually set her tea. She left a document on his desk one morning, a copy of her grandfather's original survey correspondence that she had found misfiled in the archive, and came back the next afternoon to find it gone and a note in his handwriting that said only, "This changes the timeline. I've written to Mr. Hadley to revise." That was how they talked in those early weeks, in margins and corrections and documents left in each other's paths. It was, she thought, the most comprehensible conversation she had ever had. One evening, late, she was in the library when he came in. He did not appear surprised to find her there. He took the chair across the fireplace, the one she had noticed he always chose when he was in the room alone, which she knew because she had occasionally stood in the doorway before deciding whether to enter. "My father left a note with the leather case," he said. "I found it when I was reorganizing the archive." He had written it to himself. He did that sometimes, left himself instructions about things he considered important. It said, "Should anything happen to Foxwell, see that his daughter has what was left for her. She will find her way here if she needs to. She is that kind of person." Marian looked at the fire for a moment. "He never met me. He met you once. At a garden party, when you were 7. He wrote to my father afterward that there was a child with excellent posture and a very direct way of asking questions, and that whoever she turned out to be, she would be someone worth watching. She was quiet for a long time. "I don't remember him," she said. "He remembered you." He said it simply, without embellishment, the way he said most things. "My father kept that note with the leather case for 15 years. Outside, in the direction of the kitchen garden, an owl said something definitive and flew away. The fire settled. The library held them both in its particular paper-scented quiet. She had arrived at Dunmore Hall with one trunk, a uniform she had never wanted, and a name that her uncle had tried to make useless. She had found her father's handwriting on a leather case in a cedar smelling room, and she had sat on the floor and read a letter from a man who had known her and loved her and trusted her without asking her to be less than she was. She had found, also, though she was careful about how she thought about this, careful and precise in the way her father had taught her to be about things that mattered, that there were people in the world who paid attention, who read the letters that were left to them and sat with them for 6 years until the time came to do something with what they'd learned, who left books on windowsills and noticed chalk on hands and did not fill silences that didn't need filling. Her father had written, "Do not be quiet about what you know." She had not been, and she had found her way to Dunmore Hall as he had expected, as the old Duke had expected, as perhaps the house itself had expected, in its high-ceilinged, portrait-hung, thoroughly patient way. The legal matter was settled. In the end, 14 months later, the northern boundary was restored in the records. The survey was filed. Her uncle, who had the good sense to recognize when a thing was finished, retired to Bath and was not heard from in any significant way again. She was not at Foxwell Hall when the resolution came through. She was in the library at Dunmore, cataloguing the last of the misfiled documents, when Lord Dunmore came in with a letter from Mr. Hadley and placed it on the table beside her without speaking and stood by the window while she read it. When she set it down, she looked at him across the room. He was watching her with the expression she had come to know best, the one that was not a performance of anything, that was simply him paying attention. "It's done," she said. "Yes, I should go back to Foxwell Hall." He was quiet for a moment. "You could," he said, "or you could stay." It was the most direct thing he had said to her that was not about land surveys or legal documents, and she received it the way she had learned to receive things from him. Quietly, fully, without looking away. Her father had trusted her to find her way here. She had found it, she thought. Now, she might stay.